So I'm the founder and CEO of Boomerang. I come at this from an... Am I off again? No, good. I come at this from an engineering background, studied computer science at MIT. And so what I want to share is some lessons we learned as we grew our engineering and product organization from basically the three co-founders of doing everything up to 25 people on the product and engineering teams. So I guess the first step in correcting a problem is realizing you have it. So, that went the wrong way. So the first indication we had as we started to scale that we needed to put processes in place to make it easier for product and engineering to communicate were what I call the pillboxes from hell. These are composed window pillboxes that happen in our iOS app. So as you type an email address, it turns into a little pillbox that has the recipient's name in it instead of a big text blob that has their name and their email address associated with it. When we started building this, we kind of decided we'd take kind of a hands-off role on it. Let a couple of folks who were junior on the team kind of figure out their process for building and designing these. And so what we ended up having happen was we had our designer, our product manager, design the spec for it, and then handed it off to an engineer who didn't have a lot of experience in the technology either. And it turned out that 6 months later, we finally fixed the last bug that came out of that process. And they don't look that hard, and they're really not that hard. But what we had happen was we didn't have very good communication between the engineer working on it and the product manager and the designer who'd spec'd it out. So we had platform behavior that didn't work on iOS. Nobody had done anything like this before. We had pillboxes that didn't work like anyone else's pillboxes either. They didn't work like the ones in Gmail. They didn't work like the ones in Outlook. They weren't built to spec the first time, so then the engineer went back and the product manager said, hey, this doesn't look right. Let's redo it. We didn't think about edge cases like what happens when you have 50 email addresses in the to field. How do you deal with the overflow? And then if you load a draft, the pillbox is dependent on the iOS context API being present, and that's loaded asynchronously. So it ended up being probably about 8 weeks of work before we had anything really ready to ship. And like I said, 6 months until we had the last bug worked out of it for something really, really simple. By contrast, a year later, we ported our tool we call Respondable, which is real-time AI to tell you whether or not you're likely to get a response to an email as you type it to iOS. We're using Core ML. We were one of the largest Core ML custom models that Apple has in the App Store right now. We've got it all hooked up to web views so that we could reuse some of the technology for explaining it, and it actually performs better than our web version of this. So we built something much, much more complicated in the same window with the same layouts and everything else in 6 weeks from the day we started working on it until we shipped it to users. So that went exactly on time, no surprises, no bugs, basically as smooth as it could go. So what changed for us? Well, so one of the things that we believe is the real magic happens when you can have engineering and product have a conversation where both folks know enough about what's going on to be able to be accretive to each other. So by talking to the product manager, the engineer has new ideas about the technology that they wouldn't have had. And by talking to the engineer, the product manager has new ideas about the product that they wouldn't have already had. And if you can kind of get that feedback cycle going, that's when you really hit things like Respondable, where it's like, hey, okay, could we do this? Oh, there's this thing called Core ML. That might let us use better models. Oh, that would be really cool. And then you kind of amplify each other instead of kind of holding each other back. So we started to become a lot more mindful about making sure that we put folks in a position to have those conversations and that those conversations would be meaningful. So I've got my one MBA slide here. How do we do that? Well, we've got the 3 E's and they kind of build on each other. So what are the expectations for everybody in the conversation? We take some time to make sure that the product manager and the engineer are both educated enough about the other one's responsibilities and challenges that they can have a deep conversation. And then we've set up opportunities on a kind of regular cadence for folks to engage, for the product managers and the engineers to engage with each other. So I'll share a couple of things that we've done that have worked pretty well as we've kind of pivoted our team from small to a little bit larger. I will make the caveat, I have not worked in this problem in a large organization, so if you're from Salesforce or Oracle, this may or may not be valuable at all to you. But maybe there'll be something you can take away from it. So the first thing we did is we wanted to set up clear responsibilities. Who's responsible for making every decision as we go along the way? And for us, how it works under the hood, that's an engineering decision. The product manager should not be deciding whether or not we're using core data or a different iOS database layer. How it behaves from a user perspective, product has the final call on that. So if the product manager says, hey, this is really important and it's going to take 3 extra months to get it right, that's their decision to make. The final call on estimates, though, goes to engineering, right? If the product manager can't say, oh, well, this is really only going to take 4 weeks. If it's going to take 6 weeks, it's going to take 6 weeks. And the final call on prioritization goes to the product manager. That helps everyone understand what their goals are, both from like a core responsibility standpoint and from a consulting standpoint, right? If you're an engineer and you're not responsible for figuring out how it behaves from the user perspective, you understand that your role is to consult and help the product manager make those decisions better, but to not make them yourself. Second thing, one of the things that we've kind of instituted as one of the company values as a whole is everyone should understand what's the point of what I'm doing, right? Is the point of this feature to boost retention for the users? Is the point of what this bug in the engineering organization is to make a slow part of the app perform faster? Is the goal of this to try something new that might be able to excite users in a way that they've never had something like this before? So we ask everyone to have an understanding of why am I working on this? Why is this important to the organization as a whole? And if they don't have that, then ultimately it falls back to me being able to communicate that to the team. Everyone should understand, why are you doing this? And then when you have that understanding, you can say, okay, cool, the goal for this is to boost retention. So it may not matter about if we do it X or if we do it Y, as long as we get this core piece built. And everyone understands what those core things are. So let's talk a little bit about how we get folks brought up to speed. And this is important for us because we have folks coming in from different backgrounds. So even if you're a senior engineer at Google, the scale of stuff at Google is so different than the scale of stuff with us, right? So everyone needs to know enough about the priorities and the terminology to communicate effectively specific to our business. So let me give you an example. One of the things we do with every engineer is we teach them the RICE framework. So reach, impact, confidence, and effort. This is a common framework for figuring out what for prioritizing what you're going to work on, as you build. So the reach is how many users is this actually going to interact with this. Impact is how big of an impact is it going to have on them. Confidence is how confident are you that it's going to have the effect you expect, and then the effort is how hard is it going to be to build. So we teach every engineer this framework so that they can kind of look at it and think, okay, cool. This particular edge case will only affect 5 users. I don't care. I should probably not build this before I check in with the product manager. And like I mentioned, this is specific to us too. So one of our best engineers came from Google, and so a bug that would impact 1 in 10,000 users at Google. I mean, they've got 1.5 billion users, right? All of a sudden, you've got what would that be, like 15,000 support tickets, right? For us, we on our iOS app, we have 250,000, right? So if it affects 1 in 10,000 users, we got 25 people. If it crashes once a month for 25 people, it's not the end of the world. And so one of the big adjustments he had to make was figuring out, okay, cool, these things that used to be a really big deal for me at Google aren't really a big deal anymore. I've got to be thinking about, on the other hand, if we could spend that time, bringing Respondable into the app and making it differentiated from other email apps, that would have a much bigger impact on the overall user base. Likewise for product managers, it really helps for them to have a sense of what's hard, what's easy, what does the framework make hard, what does the framework make easy, and have enough of a sense to know when you're kind of fighting the tools you have and when you're going along with them. So the technique we've used for that is we've actually have, anytime a PM joins a project, we have them sit down with the lead engineer and just go through the bug tracker's closed bug history and talk about every single one of them and say, okay, cool. What were the surprises here? What was different? What was the same? What was as you expected? What was easier than you expected? And when they have that context, it makes it a lot easier for them to kind of say, develop kind of those spider senses and say, okay, cool. This seems like it should be easy, but maybe it won't be. I should probably check in with engineering before I keep going on this spec because, this seems like there might be something I'm not understanding here. And when you kind of get folks at that level where they have that basic understanding of how the other person thinks and what are the things that are kind of going on, that's when things start to become more accretive. That's when a product manager can engage in a way that helps the engineer be more effective. And that's when an engineer can engage in a way that helps the product manager be more effective. So let me talk about a couple tactical things we've done for getting those conversations to happen once folks are up to speed. So we really wanted to set up a way for a cadence to kind of almost force these conversations to happen more frequently than a bunch of introverts are comfortable with. So y'all probably all do this already. Sprint planning meetings, we always have an engineering lead and a product lead sit down together to plan out the sprint. And that gets us, every single bug, gets a small conversation between the two of them. So if anyone kind of feels like, well, this might be a little bit weird, or there might be an edge case with this, or some complexity, or maybe this will impact a different feature, that always gets talked about before anyone actually starts doing any work on the feature. The main thing that we kind of learned from doing these, I mean, we've been doing them forever, is that sometimes it's time as your engineering team starts to grow to get out of the way. So I used to sit in on all of these, and as we scaled, I couldn't anymore. And so I've kind of taken at this point, there are a lot of these that happen without me having any knowledge of it at all, or even our chief of product necessarily knowing what's going on, except at the end of it and looking at it and saying, okay, cool, this looks reasonable. And we've let some folks make some decisions that, we weren't sure if they were mistakes. We thought they might be, but not real big ones. And then they've learned from them. And it's really kind of helped us get everyone a little bit more independent to just kind of be like, okay, cool, it's their call. They get to make the decision. Let this go. And that's really helped us. The other thing that we started implementing is we do so the way our engineering team works is they make they write a bunch of code, then they make a pull request that gets merged into the main master branch before it goes live to customers. So we asked all of the engineers to, before you actually merge a pull request into the master branch of the code, show it to product and talk with them about it and make sure that the behaviors is expected. And we did this actually because a bunch of folks were committing things that weren't according to spec, and we kind of wanted to get ahead of it. But the value was actually a lot more than we expected, because it kind of set up an expectation that product and engineering were going to be talking on an almost daily basis. So it basically pulled the engineer out from behind their computer and made them go stand in person with the product manager and say, hey, let's talk about this. And once they started having that level of basically daily interaction, a lot of the problems kind of went away, because they talked about, hey, this is why the spec is written this way, and this is why it doesn't match. And it really helped get everyone on the same page repeatedly. And sometimes the answer would be, oh, well, it's really hard to build this way. Okay, cool, well, let's do a compromise, and let's figure out how to do it. So we kind of got a side benefit that was even more valuable to us than what we expected to get out of it, just by making sure those conversations were happening on a one-to-one basis, not a pre-scheduled meeting, but something where it's ad hoc, but basically every day. Finally, and if there's one thing you take away from this talk, getting support office hours has been huge for us. So what we do when support office hours happens is we get the support lead for a product, the product manager for the product, and the engineering lead for the product all in a room together every week. And they go over the weird tickets that the customer support team doesn't know what to do with, bug reports that are coming in at a really high frequency, basically anything that the support team thinks is worth bringing to their attention. And we have it happen every single week, so there's a cadence around it. We did that mostly as a way to make sure that we were responding to customers and realizing things were going on. But again, it had huge benefits for us. And the reason was because when you have the engineering lead and the product manager for the product sitting in a room together, going over a customer feedback together, you kind of get that education that I was talking about, again, on an every single week basis, right? When the customers write in and say, hey, there's this bug, and the engineer says, oh, I know why that's going on. It's happening because of X. I think we could fix that. The product manager learns from that and says, okay, cool, X is a source of bugs for this, and kind of has an understanding of why it would be going on. And at the same time, the engineer, a lot of the default reaction as an engineer to a customer support bug is, oh, I know how to fix that. I'll go fix it right now. And getting the feedback from the product manager, okay, cool, we've only had one bug report for that, but we've had 16 of this other thing. Let's fix the other thing, and we'll get to that a month later. Really helps the engineering team understand, okay, this is why they're thinking this way, and kind of gets that same kind of continuing education and reinforcement of, hey, here's how to think about the product management side as an engineer. And as a bonus, the support team learns how to do this too. So, the first week we have a new support person join one of these meetings. They bring a bunch of stuff that, that they probably could have figured out on their own. But a few months later, all of a sudden you kind of got this first pass filter where they're thinking about it and understanding a little bit about the engineering side and a little bit about the product priorities at the same time. So the quality of feedback you get from your support team goes up, and their ability to engage with the customer about a specific issue gets higher too. So you also get really, really competent support people from doing this. And finally, it's kind of an opportunity for everybody to engage with customer feedback on a weekly basis also. Because it's really, really easy to just kind of get sucked into your own cadence and not talk to the customers. And this kind of forces you to every single time interact with them. So there's one thing you take away from the talk, do support office hours. It's made an enormous difference for us. Cool. Okay. I probably missed some stuff. The speaker notes weren't showing up, but I think I'm going to wrap up and let you guys ask some questions, and then we'll get to the bar. Thank you. Cool. Any questions? Yeah.
What's your ratio of PMs to engineers?
Yeah. Right now we're 1 to 4 for well, product team members to engineers. I think we actually probably want that to be a little bit lower. So I think we want more folks on the product team because there's a lot of stuff we're not doing as much as I'd like to, right? Surveying users, we don't do a lot of that. You know, we end up having opportunities where we do interact with customers pretty regularly because it's like, okay, we're going to go do a field study or something like that. But like the really rigorous UX testing, you know, it's hard to do that stuff on as consistent of a basis as you'd like to because there are always opportunities to make the product just a little bit better that come out of that, you know. But at the same time, if you know you're dealing with a new Gmail interface, you know, you've got to get ready for it. That's sort of got to be your focus. So I think we'd actually probably like it to be about 1 to 3 on the product team to be able to, you know, make sure we're hitting that bar. Yeah.
How do you make sure your engineers have the context to decide what would be higher priority? For example, they want to reach the PM, or the PM is not available, but they have 2 cars which are there, so then they can run right? How do you share the context, or how do you think PMs can share the context so that they're empowering their teams to also understand your priority?
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. So the question is, what happens if the PM is missing? How do you empower the engineers to understand what the priority should be when there's multiple things in the sprint that they could all work on? That's a great question, and I think we've kind of it may be a harder problem for us when we're at 100 people than it is right now. Right now, we have rarely had a case where the product manager and the engineering lead are both out for an extended period. So usually, both of them have been there at the sprint planning meeting and have kind of talked through the prioritization of the bugs. And usually, I mean, we're still small enough that you know, my co-founders and I, one of us will have some finger on the pulse too, so we could kind of be like, okay, probably this, I hope. One of the things that we are trying to do a little bit more of is to try to loop in more of the more junior engineers in some of those sprint planning meetings also, so they can, you know, with kind of an encouragement to, you know, be more of a fly on the wall than a participant, but kind of see what's going on, and then, you know, as you've been to a few of them, you could participate a little bit more. So we do try to get folks, even pretty early on, some exposure to that thinking, so that they can kind of, you know, maybe they wouldn't necessarily. I guess one of the challenges is I don't know that there's a way to accelerate like that. Hey, I've been doing product stuff for 10 years, so I kind of have a sense of how this is going to go that I can't explain to you. Or the same thing for engineering, right? There's a certain amount of things where you're just kind of like, this is going to be hard, and I don't know why, and I don't think you can kind of force distill that down. I think that's what comes with the experience and the suffering and the mistakes. But I think, you know, just a little bit of exposure goes a really long way to help folks make decisions that, you know, won't be tinged by that, you know, 10 years of experience working in the technology, but will generally be sensible and won't be crazy. Cool. Anything else? All right, awesome. Thanks, y'all.